Welcome back to Logic. I'm Tom, and today we are talking about weakness of the will. Um, so, this is a phenomenon in philosophy, or it's a phenomenon that philosophers argue about whether or not it really exists, right? And the way I want to um, frame this up is with a kind of common saying. Maybe some of you have heard of it. People say, if you know better, you do better, right? Um, so, for people who believe that weakness of the will exists, they think that you can know better and not do better. And people who think that weakness of the will does not exist um, think that you know better, you do better, kind of is connected in a kind of uh, necessary way, right? That if you really know better, then you will really do better. Um, and it's to do with kind of how our thoughts connect with our actions. Weakness of the will is a phenomenon that you can know that you should not do something, but still do it, right? A paradigm example of this might be something like alcoholism, right? Where an alcoholic might know that he or she should not drink, but still does it, right? This is kind of the phenomenon of addiction or something like this. So, addiction would be a good candidate for a genuine case of weakness of the will, right? And this is significant for us because it is yet another kind of psychological explanation for how someone can know all the facts, yet and have good reasoning, yet not arrive at the conclusion that they need to, especially when that conclusion is something on the order of an action, right? Um, I will circle back to that in just a second. Um, so, to start off, let me talk about what it is for people, many notable thinkers that think that weakness of the will does not exist, right? Plato famously argues something along this lines, right? Um, the idea for Plato, so let me give an example here. Let's say you think that, if I recycle, then I'll make a positive impact on the environment. And you also think that you really do want to make a positive impact on the environment, but you're like, recycling is kind of a pain in the butt, right? So you just don't want to sort it all out and rinse out all of the plastic containers and stuff like this. And it's just too much work. And so the idea of Plato's explanation of this is that you really don't believe that your act of recycling will make a positive impact on the environment. You think to a certain extent, um, you know, you really believe that it's not really that important, right? And so when you're saying that you care about the environment and you care about recycling and you think it's important, there's a certain kind of way in which you don't fully believe those statements, right? So there's a certain degree there where you don't really know better, right? And that's why you don't do better, right? And for Plato, if you really did believe that your act of recycling will make a positive impact on the environment, then you will do it, right? Very simply, right? We act based on our beliefs, and when we don't act in accordance with those beliefs, for Plato, he thinks that we don't really hold the beliefs we think we do, right? Um, Now, if you think so for him, weakness of the will never exists, right? Insofar as you have proper understanding, you have proper actions, right? There's no gap there. There's only a question of improper understanding, and so Plato's very interested in, doing the work, the philosophical work, to have good, proper understanding, right? Um, Now, in contrast, people who think that there is weakness of the will think that, yeah, you actually can believe something and failed to do it, right? So an example of this, like I mentioned, is something like alcoholism. One understanding of alcoholism and addiction and stuff is that a person really knows that um, their drinking is detrimental to their health, or that they might die or something like this. Or a drug addict that is told by his or her doctor that if they use again, then they are likely to OD and die, right? And they really believe what the doctor says, and they really believe um, uh, that it's not good for them. They really believe that they want to live, all those things, right? But nonetheless, they just don't have the willpower to bring those thoughts to bear on their actions. Think that can happen, then you believe in weakness of the will, right? And then this would explain a lot of cases in which someone has all the relevant facts and actually has no impairment to their reasoning, their cognitive faculties, but is still not able to bring those cognitive faculties to bear on to their practical actions, right? The way they engage with the world. And so I think um, this is a pretty live debate whether or not this really happens. But I think being aware of this debate opens up a certain line of reasoning when we see that what someone says and what someone does don't align, right? And we can always ask, is this really a case of the weakness of the will? And I think in a lot of cases, there Plato has a good case to be made, right? Something like the idea that really there's a lack of understanding here, and that what we need to work on is one's reasoning, one's logic, and making sure one has all the relevant facts, and really understands those. Um, and I think that genuine cases of weakness will, are a little bit harder to find than we tend to think. So, I think it's hard to come up with cases. I mean, like I mentioned, alcoholism or addiction, but aside from that, it can be difficult to make the case that a person really understands the gravity of their actions and yet does the thing that they think is not right. Right. Plato also makes the case that no one does something that one thinks is really bad, right? Everyone does something that they think, what guides one's actions is what they think is the right thing to do. And sometimes people are mistaken about what to do really is, but nonetheless, no one actually acts against one's own interests, without any kind of disruption, right? Or kind of, what would you say? Uh, Yeah, so anyways, so this is yet another kind of like psychological possible psychological obstacle to reasoning. And this is something to think about when we look at behaviors, or we're critical or judgmental of a person's actions. Think about this, frame this up in terms of weakness of the will. When we talk about policies and implementation of them, sometimes we have at like kind of governmental level or an organizational level, we have really good policies, really good ideals, but they don't really come into fruition. And that would be kind of possibly something like weakness of the will at a kind of social level. So it's a very interesting kind of paradigm, an interesting kind of framework to think about reasoning and how reasoning applies to our actions. So that's it for today. I will be talking with you soon.